In the early years of World War II, American agricultural planners were, scrambling. Food had to be produced faster, with fewer inputs, and quite often on exhausted land. In occupied Japan and across East Asia, US military agronomists noticed something rather unsettling. Small farms were producing astonishing yields without chemical fertilizer, without tractors, and often without imported inputs. One plant kept appearing in their reports. It wasn't exotic, it wasn't new, but it consistently multiplied harvests far beyond what American farms were seeing at the time. Stay with me, because understanding why this plant worked, how it was studied during World War II, and why it vanished from American agricultural policy tells you more about post-war farming than most textbooks ever will. What azolla actually is, and why Japanese farmers relied on it for generations. Azolla is a floating freshwater fern that forms a dense green mat on the surface of paddies, canals, and slow-moving water. What makes it extraordinary is not the plant itself, but the symbiotic bacteria living inside its leaves. That bacteria fixes atmospheric nitrogen at rates comparable to synthetic fertilizer. Japanese farmers had known for centuries that when azolla was grown alongside rice, yields increased dramatically without adding manure or imported nutrients. During the war, when fertilizer shortages were common, azolla wasn't a backup plan. It was the plan. Fields seeded with azolla before rice transplanting consistently showed stronger early growth, deeper green colour, and heavier grain heads. US military agronomists recorded yield increases ranging from double to nearly triple under controlled conditions, particularly on poor or depleted soils. You know, this remarkable plant quietly tripled yields during those wartime food shortages. But honestly, the real power of azolla wasn't just about nitrogen. By forming a living mulch, it shaded the surface of the water, which reduced evaporation and at the same time suppressed weeds. That meant less labour, less water loss, and, fewer competing plants stealing precious nutrients. And as azolla decomposed, it released nitrogen slowly, feeding the crops over time rather than all at once. In practice, Japanese farmers, they followed a pretty simple cycle. Azolla was allowed to grow early in the season, and then it was incorporated into the soil just before rice planting. Some farmers even let it regrow between the rows. The result? A self-renewing fertility system. Now, American observers during the Second World War noted that rice paddies using azolla required no external fertilizer for years, which, frankly, directly contradicted the emerging industrial model back home. So, why did American researchers study azolla seriously and then, quietly drop it? During the war, the United States Department of Agriculture and military research units studied azolla quite closely. Reports from the 1940s actually acknowledge its effectiveness and even recommend trials in the southern United States. But after the war, priorities shifted rather quickly. Synthetic nitrogen production absolutely exploded. Chemical fertilizer plants that had been built for explosives were suddenly repurposed for agriculture. A plant that reproduced freely, required no purchase, and reduced dependence on industrial inputs? It simply didn't fit the economic model being constructed. Azolla didn't disappear because it failed. Actually, it disappeared because it worked just a bit too well, but without generating profit. You see, it could not be patented. and it could not be sold year after year. Plus, it encouraged small-scale, decentralized food production at a time when agriculture was, being consolidated. So, how can this forgotten system still be applied today in practical ways? Well, you don't need rice paddies to use azolla. Gardeners today use it in water barrels, irrigation ponds, and even shallow tubs. The process is really straightforward. Just introduce azolla to still fresh water that's exposed to sunlight. Then allow it to multiply until it covers the surface. Skim it regularly and compost it, or simply dig it directly into garden beds before planting heavy feeders like corn, squash or brassicas. Even small amounts add meaningful nitrogen. In survival gardening or homestead systems, azolla functions as a renewable fertilizer factory that runs on sunlight and air. And in drought-prone regions, its ability to reduce evaporation makes it, doubly valuable. Why, you might wonder, did modern agriculture bury this knowledge instead of, building on it? Post-war American agriculture was really built on scale, uniformity and chemical inputs. But you see, systems like azolla favoured localised knowledge, biological cycles and farmer independence. Those values just didn't align with an economy driven by input sales and mechanisation. By the 1960s, azolla was largely relegated to academic papers and Asian farming manuals, despite its proven performance. Ironically, today's conversations about sustainability, soil depletion and fertilizer shortages actually mirror the exact problems azolla once solved. What was dismissed as old-world farming now looks honestly like advanced ecological engineering. So, what does this World War II lesson still teach us about resilience and food security? Azolla's story isn't just about a plant. It's really about what happens when efficiency is measured only in profit instead of resilience. During World War II, food systems were judged by whether they worked under pressure. Azolla, it passed that test. When the pressure eased, the system was abandoned, not because it failed, but because it no longer served the new priorities. If you're serious about food independence, historical farming systems, or understanding what earlier generations got right, this plant deserves renewed attention. If you found this deep dive valuable, subscribe to the channel for more forgotten World War II technologies and survival systems that still matter today. And, share this with someone who understands that progress sometimes means remembering what we were taught to forget. The final siren.